In terms of the possible blackouts that we're hearing about, what is the situation there? Like, how realistic is that?
Well, I wouldn't want to, again, I mean, they're more likely this year than they were last year. That does not mean that they're really likely.
Okay.
And the problem here is that the blackout situation is not actually linked in any way to the war in Ukraine or the energy crisis.
I thought they were
so
all
did
hand
I.
in hand.
And I was like, oh, that's all. And in a way, some government sources, not all, but have been kind of intimating that they're all linked. But the problem is that we have a supply system in Ireland that really isn't fit for purpose. So we need more generators supplying energy to the national grid, and we don't have enough of those. And that means that the system might come under pressure, particularly at peak times. So I know that people are getting flack. Well, I have to cook the children dinner between 5 and 7. So don't be telling me not to use the cooker or the kettle or whatever. And absolutely, we need to be doing that. But I think people should be mindful of the fact that, maybe you don't need to put the tumble dryer on. If you've won the lotto, and you can afford to use the tumble dryer, but you might need to be putting it on between 5 and 7 in the evening. Or similarly, you might need
to... So when do you put it on? Overnight?
Put it on when supply is at its least. Now, one person...
So set the alarm, 3 a.m, you're up.
But I mean,
dry the clothes.
A lot of washing machines will have timers on them. Like, I discovered my dishwasher had a timer on it by accident because I set it to run, and then I realised it didn't go on. And then I realised that I'd had the timer set for 24 hours from here.
OK, so do look at the timers on your appliances.
My washing machine has a timer. So you set it to go on at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever it might be. And then it does all your washing, and you wake up and your washing's done by 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning.
OK.
So the idea is, one person doing that isn't going to make a huge difference to the world. But if we're all a little bit more mindful of how we use energy... And by the way, the peak time for energy is between 5 and 7 on Christmas Eve.
Oh.
Right.
The good news is that's domestic energy, but a lot of the businesses that use energy aren't working.
Okay.
So, the national grid can probably stand it. But I wouldn't want to be overstating the risk. It's higher than it was, but it's not inevitable.
Oh, OK. You're talking about when we use our tumble dryers. There are people who depend on electricity. And I'm thinking of vulnerable people. I'm thinking of people who are on dialysis machines.
Absolutely, and that's a really important point, because all of these vulnerable customers, they can't afford to lose energy. So one of the things, and the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities is acutely aware of that. So in the first instance, for people who are vulnerable customers, and that's not just people who are on dialysis, it's people who are older and people who are infirm, or people who have an older or infirm person in their house, you contact your provider, and they have a register of vulnerable customers, and they have a legal obligation to have that register of vulnerable customers, and then they have to take steps and measures to protect you. And then, of course, if you have a really serious problem and you need your power, well, then other steps have to be taken. But in the very first instance, anybody who is afraid, and I'm even talking about people who might be afraid of just being disconnected, although there is a moratorium on disconnections, so nobody's going to get disconnected for the winter. But you do need to make contact with your provider and say, listen, I or my older parent or my child or whatever is a vulnerable customer, and we need protections in the event that things go wrong.